they set this through their actuarial every year. They do it at actuary.
We were told it's now 15.13.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So it is, yes, that's, and actually, and it starts in January. So we're going to finish out the year at the 12.73 and start in January with the 15. So it's that rate's based on a calendar year, not a fiscal year.
So last year when we did the raises for PD, if you'll remember, I said something to the effect of, let's take care of PD this year, figure out what we need to do to take care of the rest of our staff next year, being this budget year that we're talking about. When I made the comment at our budget meeting about salaries, that market analysis was really where I was hoping we would start. I don't know what to increase salaries by because I don't know if we're where we're at compared to the market. So I would be in favor of starting there. I've been a proponent of merit-based pay, bonus, whatever you want to call it, for a very, very long time. So I'm not opposed to that either. But again, what does that look like once we bump up, if we bump up employees and bring them to market? Do we then wait and hold off and implement that the following budget year, or do we think we can figure it out in the budget to do a merit-based increase on top of bringing everybody to market this year? That's my thought.
So there's a way to kind of pad that as well. You kick those, if you have increases in pay, you kick those in the second quarter of the fiscal year. So it basically everything stays frozen for the first quarter of the fiscal year. And for the first 3 months, you're waiting through that analysis to see what it takes. So whatever impact it is, you factor it in for only 3 quarters of the year, which reduces it in that first year, but it doesn't reduce it in the years that follow, obviously. But I had intended, my apologies, I had intended to get on that right away. Hurricane Beryl set me back. I've lost a little bit of time. I will get started on doing some research and analytical look into salaries beginning next week, and make that a priority so that I might even be able to have some data for us by the end of September. But I've got to get some numbers to Cheryl first so that she knows how to crunch them and make sense of it all.
Chief, do we, or Mike, this might be a question for you. We used to have a step pay with police. We still have that, right? I'm getting a no and a yes. Okay. Looking at both sides of the table. Questions, comments?
Well, we're in the same spot we were last year. We're projecting a deficit,
Right.
and and of course we came in couple hundred thousand over again, which is great. But I'll ask the same question: how do we get to not having a planned deficit again? And we're talking about raises, which is great. If everybody needs to get paid, that's great. But we can't just keep piling it on because we've got a savings account. But at some point, we have to either do less or have less here, because as a city government, if we didn't have that big savings account, we can't go into debt. It's not legal to operate like the federal government at our level. So it's nice that we basically can pretend like we're going to do that. But how do we offset this versus just adding and adding and adding? And I know there's a minimum we're required to provide legally as a city, but if we're going to spend $100,000 more on something, is there $100,000 somewhere else that we choose to do that we don't have to? How do we manage that? Because otherwise we're just getting told, well, this is the minimum it's going to cost to do it, and it is what it is. If we didn't have that money in the bank, we'd have to face that question seriously. So I'll ask that question: how do we deal with that now versus waiting on it to run out of money?
Do you want me to mention the elephant in the room in hope that you don't terminate me on the spot?
Sure.
Comes out of your mouth, not ours.
Understood. One of the things that concerned me when I applied for this job was that the city did away or set at a level 0 property tax. And I'm not a proponent of big government, big taxes. But the whole purpose of property tax is to stabilize your income, because property, ad valorem property taxes are a consistent and dependable revenue stream. Sales taxes are not. And when you look at cities who rely more than 50% on sales revenues, they are absolutely at the whim of the economy. And look at what COVID did to Webster. Look at what COVID did to Kemah. The complete absence of a steady revenue stream, even if it's a small one, is truthfully kind of frightening to me as city administrator, because it's hard to plan a year out. If a tornado ripped through Home Depot and Target tomorrow, we're not building anything. And if they don't rebuild, we're certainly not building anything. Roads, what have you. And that's truthfully kind of frightening to me. It's an elephant in the room nobody wants to discuss. Nobody likes to hear about taxes. And I'm not I pay an ungodly amount of taxes personally. And I'm not in support of everything they go to, honestly. But in my mind, the purpose for taxes is to pay for the minimal infrastructure that you have in a city. And ad valorem taxes on property are the most dependable revenue stream that you're going to have. And that's just the nuts and the bolts of it. It's a bonus to have a big, prosperous, robust revenue stream from sales taxes, but it is just volatile. It can be mercurial, and so you have to factor that in.
Right, but luckily that is the game we play. We do have a year of, if a tornado comes through and takes it all out, we've got a year or 10 months. We can always implement an ad valorem tax. Well, at the end of the year. But anyway, that's an extreme circumstance where it goes to zero. That's very unlikely. That's what the rainy day fund is for. And it does get frustrating to hear we can't cut, and the answer is not take from the citizens to provide this. What about the cut? Where do we cut? There's a lot of money in this budget we spend that we don't necessarily have to provide. So again, I'd like to see on the next budget, I've asked this 2 or 3 years in a row now, I think, hey, here are all of the things that aren't required, right? How do we cut? What is a minimal government? Say that tornado rolls through, knocks everything out, we've only got the money in the bank, we have no ad valorem tax. What's the plan?
Well, we could do away. You can't do away with insurance. That's a big one. You can do away with our IT services. You could do away with our lawn service. There's no fluff in that budget at all.
Well, you say there's no fluff, but there is a lot of fluff.
Well,
we don't have to have the nice version of everything. So what I'm saying is, okay, if our landscaping budget is $100,000 and we're spending $25,000 on flowers and flower beds, you can just have grass, right? Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. But that's the discussion that I always want to have in these meetings, rather than let's go into let's put a property tax in. I mean, that's not cool.
I'm not telling you I'm a proponent of adding a property tax. I'm telling you that's the way you get to a constant revenue stream. You have a volatile system of revenue when you only have sales tax revenue. You can cut the bones. I don't think the citizens, and you're right, Ronnie, I don't think it's what the citizens want, but I don't think your citizenry on this island wants you to take away flowers from the flower beds. I don't think the citizenry on this island wants you to stop bending over backwards for them either. There's a certain lifestyle that I think people grow accustomed to. We can absolutely cut those niceties out, Alex. It can be done.
I'm not suggesting cut the niceties out right now, but on the flip side of that, you have a lot of citizens who would go, what the heck do you mean I have to pay a property tax in Clear Lake Shores because you guys squandered all this money over 10 years? If we spend $250,000 out of our savings for 10 years, it's gone, right? that's what happens. So that's why every time we look at this every year, we should always consider how do we not dip into that at all or as little as possible. Because you're right, we're very fortunate to play this game where we have $3 million in revenue from Home Depot and Target. It's great. We're living a fantasy life, really, just like Kima is. It's like, you know, if gambling came in, they'd never pay tax, right? But that's what people want us to do, is to keep that going. So.
That's an absolutely salient point and a very important one. Homestead exemptions can be set at a very high level, and they can be set to where they're locked in for certain age groups and that kind of thing. A lot of places do that. Setting a property tax on the commercial property is your most lucrative source, if it ever comes to that, Alex. But balancing things out, yes, we have a nice rainy day fund. Yes, if we got wiped out tomorrow, we could make do, and every contract we have has an out clause in it. So yes, if push came to shove, and we had to cut out the flowers, so to speak, we can do that. We can go back and pare everything down and redo it. I don't think that's the way everybody wants to approach the initial portion of the budget. And the reality is that everything gets more expensive every year. So if our revenue stream keeps up with it, that's fine. If not, then we do have to start paring down those contracts. I'm a little lost or a little unsure of what you're asking specifically for. Do you want us to bring you in a budget that is smaller each year?
I just would like to know where the extras are in the budget, right? The things that we do that we don't necessarily have to do. So when we're making a decision that, okay, we're going to budget, I'll pick on landscaping because it's an easy example. We're going to budget this. We really only need $75,000, but we're going to spend $100,000. Okay, we know that we're making the decision to budget extra because we want it to be nice, right? Rather than this is what it's got to be. That type of discussion, that just hasn't ever happened, really.
Well, but that cost is going to be based on whatever we put out in our scope of work in an RFP, which I guess when we review that later, whenever that...
Well,
which is new because we've never even had that before. So we're all, I mean, there may be a previous
well, because it's over
experience.
$50,000, you do have to go through that process. Right. And we can set that scope however this body likes it. We can definitely take that into consideration. Keep in mind, parks are very, very expensive, and they're not money generators, especially if they're not parks that bring in rentals and that kind of stuff. And Clear Lake Shores has a lot of parks. That's part of the allure to Clear Lake Shores is people love the parks here. But you have to decide. And just picking on the example you used, for the landscaping, what do we want our parks to be? Do we want them to be grass? Do we want them to be pretty and floral? How do we want them to be? How do we want to maintain them? What amenities do we want them to have? And when you start talking about cutting the fluff, that's, in my mind, that's the fluff you're referring to. And it is those amenities that they're the shinier pieces for the most part, because you don't have some of the infrastructure costs that a larger city has with the water and the wastewater and that kind of stuff. So you don't have the fabulous amounts of rolling stock that eat up a lot of your budget. What we have is a lot of contractual agreements because of the size of our staffing and the limitations we have, specifically IT, the phone services, all the cable that comes in here. I mean, Cheryl's using literally a checkbook balancing, a fancy version of a checkbook balancing and tax stuff to do our budget work and finance documents, and she's making do with it. So we're not living fat. But if you're wanting to give me a specific come in at a flat budget, I can make that happen, but it won't be without pain.
Oh, I understood. I mean, and that's true, and that's what we always try to do, is we try to have a flat budget. That's the ideal world, right? That's what you want. And I have to ask that question every time, because if we're going to ask for $50,000 or $60,000 to pay everyone more, then we need to acknowledge that we're not doing any good with our EDC. We're not doing any good bringing in any more revenue. That has been a failed experiment. We've spent $10 million, and it's time to face the music. You know, if that's it, then that's okay too, I guess. But you know, if that's where we're going, then we'll know that in 10 years we'll be implementing some form of ad valorem tax, and we should start planning for that, I guess.
I'm not ready to say that, truthfully. I think there are some other things that we can look at. Those ideas that I have are not formulated formally enough and vetted formally enough in my own mind yet to discuss them here. I will talk to you about them offline, just some of the things I've slung against a wall since I've been here in 3 months. But I don't think we've exhausted every possibility of revenue stream absent invoking some new tax. The city owns certain properties that it's invested a lot of money in. We need to find ways to offset the maintenance of those things. Parking lots example, they don't